There we go. By default, we'll ask Kevin Campbell to start the meeting. We know that Chad Peterson is on his way, but we can get through some of the superficial stuff. Could you give him your agenda for, you got it?
I got one.
Okay.
All right, I guess we'll call this meeting to order, and the first item is the roll call of members.
Dr. Mahoney.
Here.
Mayor Dardis.
Here.
Mayor Carlson. Mr. Hendrickson.
Here.
Mr. Pepcorn. Mr. Ebinger.
Here.
Mr. Strand.
Here.
Mr. Campbell.
Here.
Mrs. Sherling.
Here.
Mr. Steen.
Here.
Mr. Olson.
Here.
Mr. Selzewold.
Here.
Quorum is present.
And so is our chair.
While our chair is getting ready, we'll ask for the approval of the minutes from December 16th.
So moved.
Would move to approve the December 16th and January 3rd. Could we do both, Rick?
All right, we'll do them both at once.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the same?
Aye.
Okay, sorry, I'm going quick here. Motion carried.
Got it, Kevin.
We're on the approval.
Outstanding with that. Thank you, Vice Chair.
To be.
Apologies to everyone. Yeah, I was going to say presumed. With that, we're on item 3, approval of meeting minutes.
We've done that.
And that's for order of agenda.
Yes.
We do have, or did have, an amended agenda. Moving to were we going to move some items to consent?
Yeah, Chairman Peterson, did you have there's some language up there for it.
Nope, don't have it.
Okay.
But it was item. Yeah.
Yeah, so on the updated agenda that was passed out today, items F and G were requested to be moved to consent agenda.
Yeah, there you go. So F and G were proposed on our prior agenda, but we looked for an amendment to what was proposed prior, from what we saw anyway. So I suppose we could approve this as presented in lieu of the one that was issued. So with that, we'd look for an approval to the order of the agenda.
So move.
Is there a second, please?
Second.
Moved and seconded. And then item 5, resolution appointing vice chair, who's already done an amazing job chairing this first meeting, and the secretary of the Diversion Authority. Looking for nominations from the floor, please.
Nominate Kevin Campbell for vice chair.
Second. Moved and seconded. Any other nominations for vice chair?
Mr. Chairman, I'd move that we move to a unanimous ballot for Kevin Campbell for Vice Chairman of the Diversion Authority.
So without objection, motion and nomination cease, followed by unanimous ballot for Commissioner Campbell. Roll call vote, please.
Mr. Peterson.
Yes.
Dr. Mahoney.
Yes.
Mayor Dardis.
Yes?
Mr. Hendrickson.
Yes.
Mr. Ebinger.
Aye.
Mr. Strand.
Yes.
Mr. Campbell.
Yes.
Mrs. Sherling.
Yes.
Mr. Steen.
Yes.
Mr. Olson.
Yes.
Mr. Selzewold.
Aye.
That is everyone.
Motion passes. Thank you. We now need a nomination for the secretary of the board. Previously, it's been Don. Commissioners, mayors, council members, what are your wishes for this year ahead of us?
Mayor, I move that we reappoint Ms. Lindblom.
Second. So it's moved and seconded. Any other nominations from the floor? Any other nominations? If not, roll call vote, please.
Mr. Peterson.
Yes.
Dr. Mahoney.
Aye.
Mayor Dardis.
Yes?
Mr. Hendrickson.
Yes.
Mr. Ebinger.
Aye.
Mr. Strand.
Yes.
Mr. Campbell.
Yes.
Mrs. Sherling.
Yes.
Mr. Steen.
Yes.
Mr. Olson.
Yes.
Mr. Selzewold.
Aye.
Motion
everyone.
passes. Thank you again for volunteering your services unvoluntarily to be our secretary. With that, on to our consent agenda. Looking for a motion to approve, as suggested prior, a couple items were added to our consent agenda that were not on the initial distribution, but With that, still looking for a motion to approve.
Move to approve, Mahoney.
Is there a second, please?
Second.
Commissioner Steen?
Yep.
Moved and seconded, the consent agenda be approved as presented. Any discussion on the motion? Any discussion on the motion? Any discussion? If not, roll call vote, please.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Dr. Mahoney?
Aye.
Mayor Dardis?
Yes.
Mr. Hendrickson?
Yes.
Mr. Ebinger?
Aye.
Mr. Strand?
Yes.
Mr. Campbell?
Yes.
Mrs. Sherling?
Yes.
Mr. Steen?
Yes.
Mr. Olson?
Yes.
Mr. Seldgevold?
Aye.
That is everyone.
Motion passes. On to our regular agenda, item 6, Executive Director Report. Mr. Paulson, you have the con.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just one moment, please. Here we go. It's okay. Well, we've had a number of things recently happen. I think the board's aware of the federal funding. That's the big item that just happened last week. So through the jobs bill, we were appropriated $437 million of federal funding for the Corps of Engineers work. So we did have a press event last week that Senator Hoeven and Senator Klobuchar hosted here in the Fargo chamber. I thought it went really well. We had a lot of great discussions about what that meant and you know, going through the motions of being able to get it. I think bottom line, the board should be pretty proud of the work that everyone's put into the lobbying efforts that we've done in DC and working with our federal delegations. You know, if you recall last October, a number of board members went to DC. We had great reception there from all of the delegations from Minnesota and North Dakota. And then former Chair Carlson attended another meeting with OMB where we had a great reception. All of that, I think, amounted to supporting our senators and getting the federal funding. So right now, what that means for the program is still in discussions with the Corps. You know, obviously, the Corps is not accustomed to having the full amount of funding for projects like this. So we need to have some face-to-face discussions about potentially packaging these individual elements differently. You know, do we need to acquire land quicker? There's just a lot of discussions that we need to have. And I know the Corps is really itching to move forward on a number of different initiatives as quick as they can. So great news. You know, our focus now is on building those elements and getting them done as efficiently as possible. So a lot of great news there. With the receipt of those federal funds, we are, for the most part, a fully funded program now. So we look forward to putting our focus into implementation and kind of moving past this project development phase. So great news on that part. Just moving back to the P3 updates, our staff continues to coordinate with RRVA on a daily basis. A lot of activity going on there as they're setting up their administrative staff and moving towards meeting all of their obligations to get to Notice to Proceed 1, which basically allows them to begin operations preparing for construction. So a lot of great work from our staff and their staff working together to get the schedules, the permitting, and all the quality management plans in place. Another item that the authority's been working on is an update to the financial plan. And one of the initial steps in doing that is to reassess our risk register. And basically this item pertains to how we determine what the contingency for the program is. What we do is we assess all of the risks and we put them through what's referred to as a Monte Carlo simulation, which is basically putting a dollar number to those risks and then running that through our financial plan to come up with an overall financial plan update for the program. The last time this was done was in 2018. So you can just about imagine the risks have changed significantly since 2018. So we really spent the last week in a number of day-long sessions going through that and throwing out the risks that are no longer present, and then focusing on things that that maybe are new developments in the program. And I'll talk about that maybe a little bit more when we get to the Finance Committee report out. And then, of course, the communication strategy is also changing as we move from project development to implementation. So we've been doing a number of workshops on the communication strategy and the overall organizational structure of what that's going to look like. And I think the board did receive their first board bulletin, and we do intend to continue to work in that fashion to enhance our board communication. So if there's any feedback as we move forward from the board in how we communicate with you, certainly let us know. But I think that's going to be a very valuable piece of information sharing that we start to implore on the project. And then on the technical side, still a number of utility, township, and municipality MOUs. We see that with the consent agenda was chocked full of MOUs. We're really working our way through a majority of those, and we've got a majority of them ticked off now. There's a few out there that are still lingering, but we hope to have those complete within the next few months. And really, that's important for the program. These large P3 projects, the third-party utilities are always a major risk item. So getting these MOUs and solidifying schedule and scope of third-party utility relocations is extremely important to give us certainty on our overall construction schedule. So Mr. Bakigard and the rest of the team that have been assisting him have been doing a fabulous job on that. And then we've been also working very diligently on the settlement agreement commitments. So this has to do with the cemetery mitigation plan and some of the communities within the region that we've committed to helping to implement permanent flood protection. So those projects are all moving forward as anticipated, and they are on schedule. And so we've really been putting a lot of work in there. So with that, I'll certainly open it up for any questions the board might have.
Board members, any questions for Mr. Paulson?
I have one.
Yes,
This
please.
is
Commissioner
Commissioner
Shirley.
Sherling. Thank you. I just, Joel, I recently attended an International Red River Water Board meeting that actually Colonel Jansen chaired, excuse me. One of the presenters spoke quite a bit about the increased chance of summer flooding. I'm just wondering, when you look at your risks with your Monte Carlo profile, if that is added into that assessment.
Great comment, Commissioner Sherling. We did not consider that just because of statistically, even if you were to get a summertime rainfall event, it gets very difficult to get enough water to operate the project. This is really only intended to handle large springtime flood events. The possibility of having a summertime rainfall event where this would operate is extremely minimal. And so the risk really wouldn't have much of a financial impact if we were to include it in our analysis at this point. Obviously, I think your presenter and the information that they presented is probably accurate. We have been seeing higher and higher frequency summertime rainfall events and intensities over the last few decades. And so that hydrology certainly is always changing. But for our program and the robustness of the diversion project, it still isn't a risk that would add any sort of contingency, serious contingency dollars into our analysis.
Okay, thanks. Good to know.
Mayor Mahoney.
And actually, wouldn't it be, Joel, that with the vigorous pumps we have put in with the diversion, we actually are better protected in a summer flood because we have capacities we've never had before? So I don't know if Nathan could comment on that, but it seems to me that there's 72 pumps in the city of Fargo, and many of them have better capacity now. So I would think that the diversion actually has helped us decrease our risk.
Absolutely, Mayor Mahoney. I mean, the addressing the pump stations in town has added a ton of resiliency to the communities for those summertime rainfall events. They're sized basically to evacuate water out of the system during a 100-year flood event, and so they've added additional capacity. We certainly are much more prepared for any summertime and springtime flood event right now, but of course we're still at high risk until we get this project complete.
And Commissioner Strand.
Thank you. Joel, it's the end of January, and we have a lot of moisture out there. We haven't yet started talking about the spring melt and the potential consequences of the spring melt. I think we need to start looking there. We're only 2 months away from a potential flood event if we go back to 97 or so. But it's just a thought, if we've seen this before, where all of a sudden we just get dumped on with moisture and precipitation, especially in spring and in March right before the melt. And I think we need to start looking at what's coming at the city of Fargo too, and getting updates on the melt situations, the expectations. We had a wetter fall. I'll leave it at that, but it's a yellow light out there flashing in my head.
Yeah, absolutely, Commissioner Strand. And it's something that we're monitoring very closely. I know there'll be some projections that are released very soon. And it really, you're correct. The variables are the amount of moisture and how quickly the melt occurs. And so there's still a lot of unknowns, but if we have weather patterns that continue to dump the snow at the consistency that we've seen up to this point, certainly is going to be something to be concerned about very soon.
Mayor Mahoney.
Mr. Strand, we are.
Chairman Peterson.
Is this Mr. Olson?
This is Mr. Olson.
Mr. Olson, you.
I would like. Hey, thanks. I would like to also make a comment. I think some of the risk probably that Commissioner Sherling was talking about is possible crop loss because of operation in the summertime. And I think what needs to be understood is there will be an insurance product that is specifically there to cover the farmers in an event of a summertime event. So, from outside of the protected area, that risk is being mitigated.
Mr. Paulson, you want to elaborate on that, please?
Yeah, Manager Olson's 100% correct. So we are going to be providing 100% no-cost summertime crop loss insurance product for the producers in the upstream mitigation area. So even if we were to be seeing higher and higher summertime rainfall events, and that risk changed somewhat, even if the project didn't operate, but there was a loss of it within that upstream mitigation area that could be tied to portions of our project, that insurance product would compensate the producers. So we have looked at the resiliency of that area as far as producing, and we have tried to take all of those risks off the table as they pertain to our project and the impacts of our project.
Thank you. Mayor Mahoney.
Commissioner Strand, Brady Scribner is our new emergency manager, and actually we're having the first briefing this Friday at 11 o'clock about spring flooding. At that time, we'll get a report from Greg Gust, Grand Forks, and he'll give us a prediction. Nathan and the team will begin to look at that and see what we need to do this spring. Yes, we are concerned about the water on the ground right now, but there's a probability, and then as we get closer, predictability is where we get into that. So we will share that with you when we have that information.
Mr. Paulson, anything further?
No, sir.
You think alike.
Any questions for Mr. Paulson? If not, we will proceed on to item number 7, General Counsel update. Mr. Shackley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have one housekeeping item for the board approval, and that is every year the board has to approve and confirm the DA board and committee membership for 2022. Attached to the resolution is a listing of the committee membership that is currently in place, and we confirm that with the member entities. So just a housekeeping item. Happy to answer any questions.
Any questions, members, or a motion? We do need action.
Move to approve.
Is there a second, please? Moved and seconded. Any discussion on the motion? Any discussion? And again, it's the resolution confirming DA board and committee membership. Any discussion? If not, roll call vote, please.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Dr. Mahoney?
Aye.
Mayor Dardis?
Yes.
Mr. Hendrickson?
Yes.
Mr. Ettinger?
Aye.
Mr. Strand?
Yes.
Mr. Campbell?
Yes.
Mrs. Sterling?
Yes.
Mr. Steen?
Yes.
Mr. Olson?
Yes.
Mr. Seldrold?
Aye.
That is everyone.
Motion passes. Thank you. Mr. Shockley, anything further? I see you walking away, so I'm going to take that as a no. Outstanding. Item 8, U.S. Army Corps update. Is Terry with us?
I'm here, sir.
Nice. I'm just Chad. You're the important one. You have control. Go for it.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chairman Peterson and board members. This is the core update for January 2022. As Joel mentioned, we received just the best financial news I can ever imagine, and we're still celebrating here in St. Paul, Minnesota. And it was a pleasure to celebrate with most of you last Friday. Best wishes from Colonel Jansen again on that. Moving to the update, I'm not going to touch on construction very much. Everything is in winter shutdown. The gates, of course, for the DIS and the wild rice are still being fabricated, and inspections of those gates are ongoing. Moving down to the Red River structure. The next 4 in red are the contracts that we're awarding this year. And this is really where the $437 million is such good news. And we've been well positioned to execute in 2022, and now we've got the funding to do it. The Red River structure, we anticipate an award no later than March, as previously reported. And that's a 5-year contract. Completion would be in April 2026. This is the Corps' critical path item. For number 6, Drain 27, that was advertised today. It went out for bids today, so great news there. We anticipate awarding a contract in March for that as well. Drayton Dam, we'll probably solicit that mid-February. We do need, we have a remaining permit on that, but I'm sure that's all going to come together. Number 8, Reach SC2A, that's also a project we're ready to award. We'd probably put that out for bids in March and award that in May. So moving on to what we're continuing to do to position ourselves to execute this project. We're for Reach 1B, 95% review starts. 2B, we're at 35%. SE4, we're starting detailed design on that, and that's the Reach in Minnesota. Thanks for pointing that out. And then SE5, we're continuing to look at the conceptual design for that. Additional activities this year include executing some forest and additional cultural mitigation, complete the pre-project geomorph surveys, emergency action planning, and then continuing work on the project water control manual. Lots of work left to do, and now we've got the funding to do it and the funding certainty. So thank you. And are there any questions, sir?
Terry, this is Chad. I do have one. Regarding the issuing of a couple packages, and one package anyway, in anticipation of a couple more, what are you getting, and maybe you can't even comment on this because you don't know, what are you getting in terms of correspondence, in terms of interest of contractors, builders wanting to engage in the process?
That's hard for me to answer right now. We just put Drain 27 on the street, so I would have to look at the number of plan holders for that. And I'll report out that to you the next time I see you, Mr. Peterson. The Red River structure, that is a confidential procurement. That's an RFP. And so there's nothing I can really comment on the interest there. But I will take your question, Mr. Peterson, and I will be able to report out on that in the future.
That would be wonderful. Board members, any questions? Doesn't seem like we have any. Thank you for your time, Terry.
Chad, are you
Thank you.
thinking of bidding on that or something?
We can just move on to item number 9, which is public outreach. Mr. Olson or Mr. Paulson, do you want to lead? Mr. Olson, you can lead, sir.
All right. Thank you. We met yesterday. We did not have any action items, but we did receive a video from Joel and Amy in our communications department, and also the communications strategy. We were able to look at that. The video, the operational video, was awesome, and it really gives the information about the project, how it's going to operate, and it's going to be a great tool to communicate to the general public and to landowners that are affected by the project on how it operates and how it'll operate on and near to them. Some items that went on this past month there was a series of meetings for communication strategy, and with the staff changes we had in the office, look to bring everybody up to date and to work with the Red River Valley Alliance and their communication team to help strategize and improve the lands program communication, which is very important. And then the 2022 communication plan was modified because of those meetings and the suggestions that were provided. And there's 5 focus areas that are going to be focused on, and that's the lands program communication, community relations, which includes the PR, media relations, and social media. Item 3 would be internal and interagency communications, including, as you all received this past week, a new board newsletter, which will go out every other week to help keep the board up to date on where we're at. And item 4 is the emergency management and crisis communication, which is a very important part of the communications to the public. And also the last item, item 5, is the public affairs and industry communications, including conferences. There's been many there's been in this last month 3 items. The P3 agreement received an international award from the Metro Flood Authority, received that. Commissioner Chad Peterson, welcome aboard as our chairman, and I also want to thank Mayor Carlson for the great job she did in leading us this past year. And then also, as you've heard, the $437 million appropriation, which really was unexpected. And then going forward, we're looking at there was a roundtable press conference, and that was, as you know, many of you were there, and also the roundtable and press conference with the Diversion Authority and the federal funding. So, Joel or Amy, is there anything that you would like to add?
There we go. Manager Olson did a good job of explaining the plethora of things that went on this last month. I'll just add just a little bit of additional forethought into the operational video. We did preview that to the Public Outreach Committee. It's still in draft form. We're still getting comments from the Corps and some of our other technical folks. But overall, the reason we wanted to do this is just to get that baseline understanding of how the project operates. There's just a lot of misinformation out there. I shared with the Public Outreach Committee that I recently talked to somebody that thought the upstream mitigation area was going to be a permanent impoundment or a very large lake that they could go boating on. And so it just indicated to me that we need to have more outreach so that people understand exactly how this project's going to operate, the frequency of it. And we had we worked with HMG on that, and they did a fabulous job of kind of bringing a lot of the engineering terms down into everyday conversational levels. And I think the video does a really good job of getting to the point and showing people who watch it exactly how the project operates. So very excited to get that out on our website and start promoting that. And once it's complete, we'll circulate that final copy to the board prior to doing those additional efforts.
Authority members, any questions? I think the one item, Joel, on the very first sheet, you don't have to pan back, but regarding the emergency communications or communications with the emergency operations teams, not to catastrophize, but one of the worries we have is an ambulance coming to a dead-end road that's been blocked because of diversion construction. And I think our team members in medical services, fire protection, all will be in communication with us. But the more we can stress or the easier we can make it to get them the information, I think the better it's going to be. It's less ideal if someone comes to a dead-end road and has to turn around, but when it's an ambulance or fire engine, it gets to be something a bit more serious, or police protection, whatever. So if we could emphasize one of those 5 categories, I would emphasize 4. Authority members, any questions? If not, thank you, Public Outreach Committee. Item number 10, land management. Jody and Eric.
Thank you, Mary.
Or, yeah, we should start with Commissioner Sherling with the report.
She's on mute.
Are you muted, Commissioner?
I am. Thank you. Yeah, Jody and Eric, maybe both of you or one of you wants to dive into this a little deeper. We've made some really great strides. I think it doesn't begin until later in your packet, about 364. You've got an overall map of the project, and then the usual little grids that we're coloring in. There's been a tremendous amount of work that's gone into this, and the last some great strides, especially in our environmental monitoring easements. And then, of course, what we've all been waiting for is to get going on those flowage easements. That's really going to answer a lot of questions for landowners, and I know Jody's been working diligently along with Eric and the Public Outreach Committee, and trying to make sure that everybody understands how that process is going to go. So, Jody and Eric, do you want to add anything there?
Yeah, and just to kind of expand what Commissioner Sherling said, and I apologize, Mr. Dodd's he's not able to be with us this afternoon, but as Commissioner Sherling had relayed, and many of you have already heard from me in the lands update, the public outreach update, and of course both the joint boards, we've really worked to hone in on those flowage easement packets and the communications that will be going out through them. So really through a simplified packet, we took what had been sent out previously through the land acquisitions. A lot of you had seen a draft of that at the December meetings. We worked through that. We tried to simplify some of the language. One of the analogies that I've been using this morning was that my mom has land in Wyoming. She had received a letter from somebody who wanted water rights. She's a doctor in Minneapolis, and I deal with land all the time, and neither of us could figure this letter out, so she went out and hired an attorney. And again, at the end of the day, she didn't need to hire an attorney because there was nothing to be alarmed of in the letter, but because we couldn't decipher and filter through some of the legalese in there, we felt in order to protect our rights, we needed to go out and do that. That's something we want to mitigate in this situation, so we've really worked to craft that language in there. So again, it's easier for our landowners to read. We took feedback that you've provided us, both the joint boards. We worked with our land agents. We worked with our legal counsel. We incorporated it into these letters. And you will see a draft of these coming before the board at the February 24th board meeting. At the same time, all the appraisals will be adopted at the February 24th board meetings, and then the land agents are prepared to get those letters out as soon as possible. This kind of dovetails back into what was provided to us by Mr. Olson, and that also on the website, we're trying to have cohesive communication. What is out there, again, simplify the message, make it easier for people to find information on our website as they're digging through that. Those letters are going to direct people to go back to our website. It's going to list out all the information that's on there. We did make several changes, and you can see from this offer packet, the offer letter, the previous one was based off of those previous letters. This next one has been amended to be simplified. We have an open house. You guys had kind of seen some bullet points of open house meetings that we had planned for March 14th through the 22nd. We've changed that. It's a separate invitation. We've included in there an agenda, individuals who will be present to answer questions, what they can expect out of those meetings. We also added the FAQs in there, again, trying to answer questions for some of our landowners, what a flowage easement is, explaining what those different mitigation zones are, some of the restrictions that are involved in those mitigation zones, and any of our ag impact mitigation programs, such as the crop insurance program. We will continue to add those appraisals in those packets, but we did make the determination based off the feedback we got, particularly from our land agents, to pull out the flowage easement and the purchase agreements. Those added about 20 pages per parcel to those agreements, and some of our landowners have multiple parcels. We didn't want to be shipping small boxes to them, and so our land agents will be providing those to them when they meet with them. We also will have just kind of a boilerplate on our website so that they can see that, and of course contact information if they'd like to have that before the land agent comes to visit with them. So next steps for us is that, again, we're going to finalize some of the feedback that I have received. That's kind of sitting on my plate at this point. We're hoping to wrap that up early next week, get that to our land agents so they can populate those flowage easement packets. So as soon as the boards approve these again at the end of February, those can go in the mail, because I'm hearing a lot of conversation in the community. There's a lot of anxiety and also excitement about kind of seeing what those look like. And so you can expect, again, to kind of see those. You'll hear additional communications with us about those public meetings that are coming up in March. So are there any additional questions that I can answer for the board?
Authority members, any questions? Don't see any scrambling to mics.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you much. Commissioner Sherling, anything further to add? I'll take that as a no. Okay, with that, move on to item number 11, which is finance update. Mayor Dartis.
Mr. Chair,
Commissioner Campbell.
I think the intent was to receive a report from the Cass County Joint Water Resource District and the MCC JPA as part of the land meeting. I don't know if Mary just got disconnected or whatever, but I think Roger might have something to report, and I do as well.
Okay, we can continue. Commissioner
Sorry,
Sherling?
I lost my my signal there for a moment, but I'm not sure where you're at. But did Commissioner Campbell? I know they met this morning. Did he report out?
He did not. Commissioner Campbell, you want
The Minnesota side met this morning. I believe they maybe went into executive session as well. So perhaps we could get an update from Commissioner.
Sure. I'm going to report back on 2 meetings because I have not reported on. There's really some feedback.
If you are not speaking, could you mute, please? I would be grateful. Thank you.
Yeah, that's better. I want to report back on our December meeting because I have not reported on that as well. And at that meeting, we did approve 2 appraisals as well as 2 relocation moving cost reimbursements. And we at that time had reviewed the first draft of the flowage easement report. Then today, in today's activities, we did approve some 2022 farmland lease agreements. There was some more discussion. We did have an executive session regarding some land negotiations that are before the court. So I think hopefully we made some progress there today. We did approve an appraiser contract amendment, and we did receive Jody's report that she gave us just now regarding the flowage easement process and a schedule, and we're looking to see a very busy February, March, and April on flowage easements issues. So that concludes my report.
All right, Mr. Olson, do you have anything to add?
You bet. Just quickly, our land agents have been working on the environmental monitoring easements. It's been slow. We've had great progress so far, but the report this week was, we're working on it, but it's slowed down. We approved 2 moving cost bills and also a replacement housing. We approved that also for a homeowner within the staging area. And just looking forward to the flowage easements, as Kevin said on his side. And I know that a lot of the farmers and landowners out there are also really anxious to see where those are going to fall. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Olson. Commissioner Campbell, you did not need action on any of these items, did you? I'm guessing it's just updates, correct?
Just updates.
Outstanding. Anything further under land management? Commissioners, mayors, team members?
That is it. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Sherling. With that, we can move to item 11, finance update. Mayor Dardis.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. Finance Committee met yesterday. A number of things were passed to action items. There was an election of chairman and vice chairman. I'm proud to say that the vice chairman is Mr. Rick Steen, Commissioner Rick Steen, and Dardis got elected chair again.
Ooh, Dardis.
Finance report, Ken Costin had acting as the financial agent, obviously, for the city of Fargo, had a great report with recommendations with regarding to the payment schedule, and Mr. Shockley assured us that he is well on top of that, so that was positive. Ide Bailey will be doing the 2021 financial audit. And just a summary of our 2021 spending performance. Our cash budget for 2021 was $219,912,490. And through December, we expended $143,351,261. So we have a remaining budget balance of $76,561,229. Also, there was item A there, a recommendation to accept bids. Mr. Bakkegaard had bids for moving some structures within the area that's necessary to move them, and accepted the bid of Schmidt & Sons for $224,900.75. And that was a very positive bid. They plan on reusing the structures and selling them and the like. So as compared to some of the other contractors that were going to demolition them and haul the debris away, it was a very positive bid. That concludes my financial report. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you, Mayor Dardis. Any questions?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Strand.
I probably asked this before, and I don't always grasp things, but remind me, have those interim loans been paid off? The city, and there were 2 interim loans, if I remember, at West Fargo Bank, so just remind me.
They're paid.
I'll defer to Mr. Shockley.
Yes, Commissioner Strand, they have both been paid off.
So we don't have any interim financing out there at all right now, like that, where we borrowed?
Neither the city nor Cass County do. There is a temporary refunding improvement bond that's been issued by the Cass County Joint Board as part of the finance plan.
Thank you.
Any further questions for Mayor Dardis? We do need action on the 50F.
Move to approve.
Is there a second, please?
Second.
Moved and seconded again. This is the approval of the Schmidt & Sons bid. Any discussion on the motion? Any discussion? If not, roll call vote, please.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Dr. Mahoney?
Yes.
Mayor Dardis?
Yes?
Mr. Hendrickson? Mr. Ebinger?
Aye.
Mr. Strand?
Yes.
Mr. Campbell?
Yes.
Mrs. Sherling?
Yes.
Mr. Steen?
Yes.
Mr. Olson?
Yeah, yes.
Mr. Seldroll.
Aye.
That is everyone.
Motion passes. Thank you. And Mayor Dardis, you said nothing else, correct?
Yes, sir.
Outstanding. Thank you. Financial schedule, Mr. Paulson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I talked a little bit earlier about the risk register that we did. That was just a starting component of updating our overall financial plan. Once we get the risk schedule to Ernst & Young, who is our financial advisors, they will take that into account, as well as all of the loans that we've closed in the past year and the money that we've received from the state, and take all that into account, run our financial plan. And we are expecting to preview the overall capital cost expenditure for the program at the March Finance Committee meeting and the March board meeting. So if you recall, the last time this was done was 2018, and that's what amounted to the $2.75 billion number that we all use when people ask us, how much does this project cost? When we come out with the new financial plan number, that number will change, of course. And so should it after 4 years in a lot of different things that have occurred with the program. And so I just kind of wanted to give the board an idea of when, and give a preview that'll be coming forward at the March meeting. So.
Any questions for Mr. Paulson?
I have a question. This is Shirley.
Commissioner Sherling.
So when we did that plan in 2018 or whenever it was, I know that the CORS numbers included that inflation, I believe. Is that still the case? Was that an accurate figure, or does that have to be recalculated as well?
That's a good question, Commissioner Sherling. So the CORS inflationary numbers, they're looking at the year of expenditure dollars. So when we come out with a revised number, it will be in 2022 dollars. So we have to be careful not to mix the messages for folks, because obviously there is inflation year over year. And so at the end of construction, we know right now, in 2027 dollars, the program is going to be a different cost than 2.75 billion, which was calculated in 2018 dollars. And a lot of that is due to construction inflation and those sorts of things. Now that we have certainty on the interest rates that we receive from the WIFIA loan, and we know that we don't need any temporary financing to continue construction with the P3 developer because we received the full appropriation from the state and we have enough cash to support the milestone payments. It's really time that we take another look at and update that financial plan to get that number. And so I guess the long story short, Commissioner Sherling, it won't necessarily take into account the year of expenditure dollars that the Corps has been talking about, but it will update the Corps' numbers into 2022 dollars. So.
Any further
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Sherling. Any questions to Diversion Authority members? Any further questions? Mr. Paulson, anything further to add?
No, sir.
Outstanding. Move to item 12, please. Other business. Cemetery Protection Plan. Mr. Shockley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We'll get a PowerPoint presentation up here shortly. I promise it won't be too long.
I hope you read every line. That'd be great.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The executive director and the staff had asked that we provide a update on the cemetery mitigation plan. And the cemetery mitigation plan is essentially an overarching plan that is intended to guide how we provide mitigation to the different impacted cemeteries within the UMA and in the project area. And just briefly, the federal environmental impact statement had provided that some cemeteries in the staging area would be impacted. Originally under Plan A, the Army Corps of Engineers had released a federal cemetery plan that identified some options. The cemetery plan is also required by Minnesota Dam Safety Permit, condition number 25. Based upon the experience that was set forth in the Plan A documents, and then also the requirements of permit condition number 25, the authority, we formed a local cemetery mitigation team. And then in addition to that, under the settlement agreement terms, we have an obligation to develop a plan and work with the different cemeteries that are impacted to develop a plan. Finally, the PRAM also requires that we develop a cemetery protection and mitigation plan. I would note that as we're developing this plan, as sort of the holder of the pen, so to speak, there are not a lot of precedental documents dealing with cemetery mitigation. Most of the mitigation plans that I could find and locate were really dealing with wet dams where you're totally relocating a cemetery, as opposed to a dry dam where you have very sporadic flooding maybe every 20 years. And so the purpose of the plan is quite straightforward. Plan A was the basis for the federal cemetery study. As a result of our changes in Plan B with the alignment, specifically in the southern embankment, some of the cemeteries are impacted differently than was originally contemplated. And also some of them aren't even impacted at all anymore. So there was positive developments from the selection of Plan B in the location of cemeteries. So the cemetery protection plan identifies impacts and mitigation measures that we're going to, gives us sort of a bookends, if you will, as we work with the different cemetery and cemetery boards to develop a mitigation plan. There are 6 impacted cemeteries, and I thought it would be helpful just to call those out and identify the locations. Those 6 are Clara, Eagle Valley, Hemnes, North Pleasant Cemetery, the Rowan Family Cemetery, which is actually a small family plot, and then the Wolverton Cemetery. The Wolverton Cemetery is actually included within the settlement agreement, and so we're specifically addressing those. I know just for your information, I thought it would be helpful to identify the different locations of the cemetery. And I'll use Clara Cemetery as sort of an example of the flexibility that's contemplated in the cemetery plan. The cemetery plan contemplates that we can employ a number of different mitigation measures. That it could include putting a non-certified ring levee around the cemetery. It could include, for those cemeteries that have lower levels of impacts, it could include fencing that would prohibit debris during flood events from floating into the cemetery. And then it can include like adding extra soil to the cemeteries. There are certain legal challenges with obtaining flowage easements to the cemeteries, depending upon the legal structure of how the cemetery was plotted and the ownership of the cemetery. Some cemeteries, the plots are actually owned by the people that have been buried or their next of kin in that location. Some other legal structures are where the cemetery board has control over the cemetery where they can give a flowage easement. So there's some complexity in the legal side of getting a flowage easement. And having to potentially track down different next of kin could be a potential issue to get them to sign off on a flowage easement. Not only that, it could be potentially disruptive and traumatic to different family members performing that. So for some cemeteries, like Clara Cemetery, it makes more sense to have a ring levee around it. Under the Minnesota permit, it appears that we're working with Minnesota DNR where they would allow us to exempt that out of the impacted area because it has a ring levee around it. And it does not appear that we will need to have certified flood protection for that ring levee, which is important because there's no structures, habitable structures within a cemetery, but obviously we want to make sure it's protected. Some of the questions that came up yesterday in front of the Lands Committee were, does the cemetery plan take into account access and egress issues for cemeteries if you're putting up a ring levee around it? We are contemplating that, and we do have HMG and the Director of Engineering working on our team to make sure that as we develop that mitigation, which each cemetery, those items are taken into account. That can also include how distant the ring levy would be from the cemetery. If you just wanted to scroll down, and we'll just quickly cover the location of some of the other cemeteries. This is Eagle Valley Evangelical Cemetery. It's located in northern Richland County. It has a much smaller impact, and so there's different mitigation methods that would be taken in for these types of cemeteries. Then you have Hemi Cemetery. You can see the location of that. This one is a little more challenging due to its location next to the river. So there's some unique issues that are associated with that. Then you have North Pleasant Cemetery. That is also located within the fringe area of the protected area. And so the cemetery plan contemplates such options as we could put a fence around the cemetery that would prevent the debris if there was flooding from crops that would inundate the cemetery. One of the reports that was done by the Corps early on was with respect to if there would be ice or disruption that would occur with the cemetery with the headstones. And the analysis that came out of those reports was in the Red River Valley. Typically cemeteries that are farther away from the river typically don't see ice jams because the ice comes up through the river. And so most of the cemeteries just have water flooding and maybe a little bit of debris from a field that's close by. And so with these cemeteries that are in the fringe areas, we're trying to have a little more flexibility in how we mitigate potential impacts. This does require working with the cemetery boards, and we have a team that's going to approach that. This is the Rowan Family Cemetery. This does have some historical significance with it, and we're working with that family to try to see what type of mitigation is available. And then the Wolverton Cemetery, that is actually called out in the settlement agreement in that we were working with Buffalo Red River Watershed District and their MOU, and part of the flood protection program for Wolverton will include addressing any flood impacts to Wolverton Cemetery. So there are two impacted cemeteries that experience what are referred to as viewshed impacts. And that just simply means that the view that they currently have is changed because of the project, and that's St. Benedict's Cemetery. That's because of its location just to the north of the southern embankment. And then the lower Wild Rice and Red River Cemetery will have some viewshed impacts. And then here's just a picture of the St. Benedict's Cemetery and its current location. And then the lower Wild Rice. Just briefly, our cemetery plan, we have to abide by several different permitting and legal requirements. Dealing with any cemetery that has National Historic Preservation Act features. So if there's a cemetery that has something that of historical value in them, then we have certain rules that we have to comply with. Also, the Minnesota permit that was issued by DNR in Minnesota will have to coordinate with DNR and also with the cemeteries and have to have an agreement, a mutually agreed upon mitigation, and then we'll submit that report to the Minnesota DNR. We do have a good working relationship with Minnesota DNR on that issue, and so that later on you'll see those agreements come through once they're finalized. The non-federal requirements that we're going to employ for our mitigation, ring levees, dikes, fencing, we might have some additional maintenance requirements and solutions to eliminate impacts and erosion. The federal requirements, as I noted, we technically have to obtain a flowage easement on impacted cemeteries located in Zone 1 and Zone 2. Because of the legal challenges associated with that, we're opting for the ring levies because that might be initially on paper, on hard costs, it might look more costly, but when you start to add in the soft costs, the administrative costs, and the difficulty obtaining flowage easements, it'd be easier to build a ring levy and essentially exempt that cemetery out of the area. Part of our goal is to make sure whatever type of mitigation that we implement doesn't adversely affect normal cemetery operations. That would be burials and normal cemetery maintenance. So that's why we have the HMG and Director of Engineering on our team, so that we're making sure that we're addressing those items. And at all times, we want to be very respectful of the cemeteries and the issue, given the sensitivity of this matter. Happy to answer any questions. I tried to keep the presentation short. If you have very specific questions, I'm happy to sit down with anybody who wants to talk about the cemetery mitigation plan.
Questions for Mr. Shockley? Commissioner Strand?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As I recall, prior to the Plan B shift to the new footprint that we have now, we had significant engagement with Native American cultural representatives. And as I recall, we didn't have any concerns. They weren't in the original footprint. Could you remind me two things? Number two, did we finish that and complete that process with the new footprint? And then secondly, if we should in the process uncover a historical native site or burial site, because those aren't formalized cemeteries, what happens?
So great question. So with the Plan B project, we have the same requirements under SHPO and some of the other federal requirements, in that if any of the sites have to be cleared before construction can commence. And Terry could probably give you a in-depth lecture about the requirements. But in general, yes, we're continuing that process. In the event, and this is also covered on the channel construction and the P3, in the event that there was area of cultural significance found, we have a process in place where you'd have to decide, you have to stop construction, decide how you mitigate that impact, whether or not it needs to be preserved, who the artifacts belong to or should be preserved by. There's a very detailed process in place to make sure that cultural artifacts from indigenous groups are protected through the construction process.
Thank you. Any further questions? Authority members?
Mr. Chair. Move to approve.
This is information only. We shouldn't need any action.
Correct.
Correct.
Just
Yeah,
information.
Perfect. Anything further? Mr. Shockley, anything further?
Nothing.
Thank you. Item B, Diversion Authority Public Meeting Calendar. Joel. Mr. Paulson, I should say.
Thank you, Chairman Peterson. So we have previewed this calendar at the previous board meeting. Not much has changed, and we did not receive any comments from any board members. These meetings are consistent with the meetings from 2021, and so we just asked the board to take action to approve the meeting calendar for 22.
I move the meeting calendar.
Is there a second, please?
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Any discussion? If not, roll call, please.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Dr. Mahoney?
Aye.
Mayor Dardis?
Yes.
Mr. Hendrickson?
Aye.
Mr. Ebinger?
Aye.
Mr. Strand?
Yes.
Mr. Campbell?
Yes.
Mrs. Shirley?
Yes.
Mr. Steen?
Yes.
Mr. Olson?
Yes.
Mr. Salzbold?
Aye.
That is everyone.
Wonderful. Our calendar is formalized. I think we have most of our invites out, but if not, we'll push them out to you. Item 13 is our next meeting, February 24th. I'm sure everyone's aware of that. We have other items. Mayor Dardis.
I have one comment to make. When Mr. Paulson rose to speak about the 2022 financial plan, he discussed contingency and risk assessment. I want something clarified in our 2021 budget. There are 11 primary budget categories. 10 of them are funded. In 2021, we had nothing funded for contingency because we were just at the beginning of this whole process. And the only point that I want to make today is that at some point in time, moving forward with our administrative team and or our attorney and or the Jacobson Company, there might be an evaluation done that we might have to put some contingency money into the budget with regard to if any risk type things develop. It's just, that needs to, the board needs to understand that might be a potential in the future.
Thank you, Mayor. Diversionary members, anything further? If not, item 14, please.
Move to adjourn.
Is there a second? Move and second. All those in favor?
Aye.
We We stand adjourned. Thank you, everyone, for your time. Have a good rest of your day.